nerds, what's up? Today I want to talk about 5 of my favorite villains from adult fantasy. Now, I think what makes a really good villain is either if they are very nuanced or complicated, or if you just hate them so much that it gives this like giant emotional reaction in you. And it's a fine line because there are some villains who give that emotional reaction, but it's because it's bad writing or the story is stupid and it's unbelievable. I think if those villains are going to give you that strong emotional reaction, it still has to make sense in the story. So those are the kind of villains I'm going to talk about today. I will say I am trying to keep this video completely spoiler free, so if I am ever going to go into a spoiler territory, I will be warning you so that you can skip to the next villain. Without further ado, let's get into it. One of the villains I think of is Andros Guile from the Lightbringer series by Brent. Now, full disclosure, I've only read 4 out of the 5 Lightbringer books. We can have a discussion in the comments of why that is. There are several reasons, but even through the first 4 books, I just thought he was a very compelling villain. You know, he had a lot going on. It made sense, his involvement in the story and why he was acting that way, even though he was so obnoxious and so annoying and so frustrating. And I did really love reading about his games between him and Kip. Like, I thought those were all very interesting. And I think some of the other villains on my list do it a little better, but I think he was a really strong villain. And I actually had part of the 5th book spoiled for me. And I think the motivations that were revealed in the 5th book even put better and more context into his actions in the rest of the novels. So yeah, I think Andros Guile is a great villain. My next villain is Know to Me from the Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu. Look, the Dandelion Dynasty is full of villains. This is a book with lots of villains, lots of nuanced villains, and there is one villain that I really love, but it's just like too much of a spoiler to talk about. So I have to go with Know to Me just because I hated him so much. Now, he is a villain in book 1, but I think in book 2, his villainy really takes the cake and really develops in a new way. I think what's so tough about Know to Me is unlike some of the other villains in Dandelion Dynasty who you know are bad and other characters know are terrible within the universe, Know to Me takes that horrible spot where a lot of characters in our story don't necessarily know he's a villain. And because of Liu's writing style in the Dandelion Dynasty of having that 3rd person omniscient, it's like that slow train wreck you're just watching because you know what everyone else thinks about him, but you also know what Know to Me is thinking, and having to watch that was some of the most frustrating and infuriating moments that I've ever had. And he's just so slimy and you just know that person exists. And I just think he was a great villain for the story. Villain number 3 is Redacted from the First Law Trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. So I can't say this villain's name if you haven't read the story because it would be a spoiler, but it's one of those things like, if you know, you know. So I don't think I need to say the name. First Law fans will get it. Everyone else won't know and I won't spoil it for you. But I think this is probably the most chilling villain on my list in many ways. I was totally taken in by this person. I was really, even until very late in the game, kind of like on this person's side and thinking that it was exaggerated, what everyone else was saying. And then it was like, oh no, you're a really bad person. Like the worst person in this trilogy full of bad people. And I think Glokta gets so much attention from the fans, and rightfully so. He's a great character. I just think the true villain of the story just doesn't get talked enough about how well that storyline was written and how understated yet chilling they are as a villain. And one of the characters I'm actually the most interested in reading about as the First Law world continues. And this is an interesting villain because I don't hate them. I think it's more like they're fascinating in their villainy. Villain number 4 is Redacted from the Stormlight Archive by Brent and Sanderson. Now, this is one, unlike the First Law, that I actually can't talk about without saying the name. So if you are not caught up on the Stormlight Archive, that means if you have not read Way of Kings through Rhythm of War, you need to skip this section. It will be huge spoilers. So, ready, I'm gonna give you 3, 2, 1. Okay, spoiler time. It's Taravangian. I love Taravangian as a villain, probably one of my favorites. His combination of Bane and Boon is just so fascinating in the way that it makes him a villain, and the way he justifies his actions, especially with like, while I'm saving my own city, doing the best I can, is really interesting. And seeing how Sanderson has pitted compassion against intelligence, which is definitely not a new thing that usually happens, but I think in this context it brings freshness. And it's so interesting now at the end of Rhythm of War, pitting race, which is kind of like our very classic like hate villain, to now Taravangian taking up that shard, is really like, I wasn't that scared of race. Like, I know he was the big bad Odium, but there's something around, he wasn't that scary. But Taravangian as Odium is terrifying to me, because someone who the ends always justifies the means and has the intelligence sometimes to back it up. Now, we don't know what's gonna happen with his whole thing now that he's taken up a shard, but I'm just so interested to see that play out. I think he's my favorite villain of the Stormlight Archive, even though there's plenty of villains to choose from. On the hate level, like, I get really annoyed by Taravangian, but ultimately I'm too fascinated by him. His perspectives are some of my favorite. Like, I'm always down for a Taravangian perspective. And finally, I saved the villain I hate most for last, which is Regal from the Farseer trilogy by Rob and Hobb. I don't have much to say about Regal other than I hate him. I hate him. I hate him. I don't know if I've hated a character quite as much as I hate Regal. Something about the way the Farseer trilogy works. Like, I still remember literally where I was when I finished Royal Assassin, whatever the second book was. Like, that's the ending. Regal wins. Oh, and just in the third book, like, everything he does is so infuriating, but it's also so believable. Like, there's never a point where it feels like it's too far. Like, he's just narcissistic and terrible, and even though it's been years since I read those novels, the hatred I have is still kindled alive. So I think of all of the villains on my list, he's the one that it's like the least nuanced for me. He's just straight up villain, and I straight up hate him, but it's done in the best way, I think, in terms of a villain that's hated. Okay, those are 5 of my favorite villains of adult fantasy. Who did I miss? Let me know if you love to hate all of the people on my list, or if there are some people you're like, no, that villain just totally didn't vibe with me. Let me know in the comments below. And as always, if you like this video, please like and subscribe. That is the best way to support me. And if you want to see what I'm currently reading, as well as other nerdy rants, you can follow me on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. I'll see you next time. Bye.